Hello Year 11. Today we're going to be looking at our feedback on question 5 on your Germany paper. You should have downloaded this task sheet. If you don't have a printer, you can't print these out, you should be able to write on them on the computer. If not, then you can just write out the questions and do the tasks on paper, that's not a problem. So, let's get started. The first thing I would like you to do today is see if you can remember the challenges based on your revision that you did in your last lesson that were faced by the Weimar Republic. So pause here, complete that task, and then come back. Okay, so let's have a look at the actual question. This question asks you, or it gives you an interpretation, which is this one sentence, simple interpretation, and it says that the severe terms of the Treaty of Versailles were the greatest challenge faced by the Weimar Republic during its early years. This is where your information, and where I've said several times that you need to be reading the other stuff that comes along with the question, this is where that's really important. Because you're given this interpretation and it says, to what extent do you agree? Well, that seems really simple. We just give a for against conclusion and we're done. But it's also asking us to refer to how and why interpretations of this issue differ. So it says that we need to use our own knowledge and an understanding of the wider historical debate. So we need to be thinking about why this historian thinks that the Treaty of Versailles was the greatest challenge, and why other historians might think differently. The other thing that we have here is that we get marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar. So you get up to 3 marks for that, so it's worth making sure that you are keeping on top of your SPAG. So, to get full marks in this question, you need to have given really detailed knowledge, so we get marks for AO1. But the majority of our marks here come for our AO4, so that's our analysis of the interpretation and our understanding of what it's asking us to do. So to get 12 marks out of my 16, I need to give an evaluation of why interpretations of this issue differ. I need to show awareness of what that historical debate is, so that's talking about the other things, that balanced argument. And I need to give a well-substantiated judgment. So that means I need to say whether or not I agree or disagree, and to what extent I agree or disagree with that interpretation. So some common mistakes that were made were that many of you only talked about the Treaty of Versailles and you didn't include those other problems that were faced by the Weimar Republic. Lots of you didn't give a balanced argument. You didn't give the other side and say, I agree to some extent, however other people may argue that it was things other than the Treaty of Versailles. Not reading the question, like I just said, so that's led to poor interrogation of the interpretation. Very few of you spoke about the reasons why Fisher might have had this argument. There was a lack of detail in the answers and giving specific knowledge. I saw quite a few answers that instead of giving specific terms of the Treaty of Versailles, just said lamb. Which is not knowledge. That's just a way that we give you to remember that knowledge, but you shouldn't be writing about lamb in an answer, and you can't see it under there, but also poor attention to spelling and grammar. Those are 3 easy marks. If you can spell things like Treaty of Versailles appropriately and Weimar Republic, and you've got a decent level of writing, you are more likely to pick up those 3 marks, and they're free as long as you spell things right. So let's have a look at what this question is actually asking us to do. So I've taken away the interpretation itself, and we're just going to go through what the expectations of this question are. So straight away here, we can see that it's saying in your answer you should refer to how and why interpretations of this issue differ. So I need to be talking about what the historian thinks, but also why they think it. And you can annotate this along with me. It asks me to use my own knowledge and understanding of the wider historical debate. So this is where it's telling me to use stuff other than the Treaty of Versailles. And then we need to reach a well-supported judgment. So I need to say the extent to which I agree. So here it says, to what extent do you agree with this interpretation? A reminder that when we're thinking about the degree of extent, we can use that judgment language. So when it says, to what extent do you agree, it's asking us to think, so you agree to some extent. You could agree partly. You could agree mostly. Somewhat. Largely. So think about it's basically saying how much do you agree? And if you think, yep, this interpretation is totally correct, I think that it was the biggest challenge, then you're going to largely agree. If you think maybe we need to be a little bit more balanced about this, and that yes, the Treaty of Versailles did have an impact, but it wasn't the only impact, that we have to think about other things, you're probably likely to say to some extent, or partly, or somewhat. Okay, you could completely disagree, of course, as well. So that leads us to think about the success criteria for this answer. So in order to answer this question appropriately, I need to make sure that I have given a balanced argument. I need to give detailed knowledge on both sides. So I need to think about that historical debate. I need to give links to the question throughout, so keep linking it back. This meant that it was a challenge because. But then I also need to be evaluating interpretation. So I need to say why Fisher thinks that and why others may think differently. I also need to give an overall judgment which explains how far I agree. So take a moment now to just annotate this part of the question and answer the box which asks you to think about how you answer this question. So pause here, complete that, and then come back. Okay, so we've thought about what the question is asking us to do. Now let's have a little think about this interpretation. So it asks us to read the interpretation and answer the question which follows. So this isn't like our question 3 interpretation where we have to read a whole paragraph and figure out what they're saying. This is really simple. We've got one sentence. It says that the severe terms of the Treaty of Versailles were the greatest challenge faced by the Weimar Republic. So straight away, I can identify what my argument is going to be. So my for argument is going to be saying that it was the Treaty of Versailles that was the greatest challenge, and my against argument is going to be saying that it was other factors were more significant. So, let's think now about that requirement to interrogate this interpretation. So we've got H.A.L. Fisher, who is a British politician and historian, writing in his book A History of Europe, published in 1935. So let's break that down. We need to be thinking about why this person has this opinion. Let's take first of all the fact that he is a politician. So the fact that he's a politician may actually shape his view and the kinds of things he talks about, as well as the fact that he's British, actually. So, for example, a politician is more likely to focus on the political repercussions in the Treaty of Versailles than they are of anything else. Let's take our next section here and see that he is writing his book, A History of Europe. So this is this is going to lead him actually to have quite a narrow perspective. Okay, the fact that he's writing the whole of the history of Europe means that he's not going to go into depth in his answer. Now finally, we need to look at the date, and for me the date is the most important thing here. So he's actually writing his book in 1935. Now that's actually quite close to the event. So if we think this is all happening in 1919 to 1923-ish, so this is very close to the event. This gives him the benefit of hindsight, though, because it's close enough to the event that he probably witnessed it, but far enough away that he can think properly about it. What's important here is that he would have seen the impact of the Treaty of Versailles. Although probably from a British perspective. The other thing that we have to think about here is what was happening at the time. So we don't always know in our exam questions what was happening at the time, but here you definitely should know. So in 1935, the Nazis had very recently come to power. And much of that had been due to the Treaty of Versailles. So that's really going to shape what he's saying. Finally, what we have to do is, this is kind of a sneaky exam trick, is when we're talking about this interpretation, these are all the things that we're going to say, and they're all the things that we're going to talk about to do with Fisher's interpretation. But we also need to acknowledge that there are other interpretations. So a really good thing to get into your practice is to say that there is historical debate on this topic. And also to acknowledge that other historians who are writing at a different time. Just box that off. May have other views. Such as, and that's a really good way to launch then into your other side of the argument. So you can talk about all these things, and then you can say, however, there is historical debate on this topic, and other historians writing at a different time or with a different focus may have other views, such as. And that's acknowledging and hitting that thing on your success criteria, that you need to acknowledge that there is that wider historical debate. And you could even use that language. There is a wider historical debate on this topic. So what we're going to do now, once you've got all your annotations down, is we're going to think about what knowledge we can use. Remember, we get our 4 marks for AO1. So I would like you, please, to colour code which knowledge supports which side of the argument. So pause here, complete that, and then come back. Okay, hopefully you have come up with a key and you've thought about which side of the argument applies to which knowledge. These are the answers. So anything in pink is things that could be used in your for argument. The idea that the Treaty of Versailles was the greatest challenge. And the information in blue are things that could be used in your against argument. So things that suggest that it was other factors that were a greater challenge. So make sure that you've got those correct and change them if you don't, because you will need to use them for your rewrite of this answer. So let's have a look then at your final task today. We're going to plan our answer. It will be no surprise to you that in your next lesson you are going to have a go at rewriting this answer, but we're going to make sure that we plan it through first of all. We're not going to spend ages of time planning our answer, because you don't have ages in your assessment to plan it, but it is really important that you do at least acknowledge the planning. So we've got our question here just to remind us, and we've got our success criteria here also to remind us what we need to do. So straight away I'm going to be giving myself a little table to talk about my for and my against. So I know that this one is the Treaty of Versailles was the greatest challenge, and this one is other stuff was the greatest challenge. So in this one I'm going to be talking about my land, army, money, blame stuff, but remember, I don't say the word lamb. Use that knowledge that I've just showed you and that we've just colour coded, and use that as your words rather than saying there was lamb. In this one I'm going to be talking about the political challenges or the social uprising. And I'm also going to be talking about the Weimar Constitution. So really this argument is saying that the Treaty of that the Weimar was fundamentally flawed, that it was never going to achieve anything. I'm also going to include the fact that Fisher was a British politician. I'm going to include the fact that he is writing in 1935 and that he's going to have a narrow perspective. And that is going to help me to lead really nicely into this argument to then say other historians may think differently. and I can use that language that we spoke about before. Okay, I also then need to think about this bit, my final task. So it asks me to what extent I agree with the interpretation. So you need to come up with a judgment. As part of your conclusion. It's completely up to you. There is no right or wrong answer about whether or not it is the main reason or the biggest challenge, or whether it was something different. That's your judgment. You just have to be able to justify it, okay? So you must explain why you think that. Okay, so you've now got time to plan out your answer. You can be as detailed as you like, but you're going to use that plan to rewrite your answer next lesson. So you don't need to rewrite today, but you do need to keep all of your work from today safe so that you can use it for next lesson. Okay, if you have any questions, ask your teacher. If you need any help, make sure that evidence of your work today is submitted. Good luck.